think the personal finances come under the original jurisdiction of direct involvement of Russian interference with the election?
Certainly appreciate your concern, Congressman, but I hope you appreciate my position that if I start answering what is and isn't, I've gone down that road that I just don't want to go down of discussing what's under investigation. There have been 4 persons who have been charged. Those are known, and ordinarily the Department of Justice, that's what we publicize. If we charge somebody with a crime, we publicize it. If we don't.
Hey, morning. So, okay. Another one of these, right? Where I paint and chat it up. Gonna give you guys my daily yada, right? So here's the daily yada. Wake up this morning listening to that Judiciary Committee. It's about 6:48. I've been up since like 4:30. Coffee, dishes, and writing. Just trying to complete this exposition on parentheticals, codes, but mostly just kind of a general dissonance and dissonance in philosophy, right, concerning contemporary issues also to some extent. Meaning when you're working with positing elements such as P, you say P and then not P. And then you have the phrase not P. And as soon as you get to not P, then it requires almost a syntactical codicy to run in alignment with it. And that's what Derrida's split, I believe, is namely corresponding to, is that when I say not P, that's different than if I type not P, because in the typeface you not necessarily, I mean, it's also kind of a convention, but conventionally necessarily, we bracket, we parentheticalize the P or the not P or even the not P. And so this parenthetical syntax then defines itself relative to a code system, right? But the phoneme, meaning the verbal, the lingual, the ephemeral, right? Outside of a codec, outside of a recording, remains important in its ephemerality. And this ephemerality is most appropriate to focus upon because it relies specifically on the entropic principle. By the entropic principle, what are we to talk about? The entropic principle is that things in the world change, right? Now, Platonic forms, right, even the way we consider a Platonic form, let's say a triangle or a cube or something like that, that seems to be non-entropic, disentropic, negentropic, right, or decursively entropic, meaning it's not it's not entropic, right? And then you say, well, it's not entropic, right? And everything becomes a little fun in kind of a happy way when you think about the entropic principle, and then Platonic forms. So you take something like a Platonic form, you say it remains in stasis. It's a part of a priori deduction. It's an analytic transcendent element or item of discourse. It's intergenerational. It's been going on for years and decades and centuries and millennium now, right? In that we can pass down this idea of a signified or a mental element that seems not just a mental element, but a relatable mental element, a signified, right, that projects itself into the world and into other signifieds. So you have the intersubjective plus you have representation or a referent, right? Such that we can agree upon what a triangle is, or what a pyramid is, or what a cube is, or what a square is, those types of things, generally. So they're negentropic in that they persist intergenerationally. But what is what is entropic is still the human, right? And what is also a problem with encoding or recording the ephemeral is then you've, like the beginning of this video and the end of this video, you could say are parenthetical limits to the recording of me as an aging creature painting something in this place in this time, unlike any other place and time. Now, the reason a lot of issues, I believe, politically are occurring, right, and that now is not quite any other stage, isn't just because like we've had recording devices, we've been able to draw in the sand and agree upon it. So it's an ephemeral recording device, right? And then even like tapes and records and other analogic histories, books, obviously books, recording devices handed down, right? So still analogic, meaning a book can get old, fall apart, right? So everything is about, meaning not everything, but everything that I'm speaking on here is relative to this disjunct between the recording and the like the recording as an encoding, right? It's encoding digitally, and its relationship to a transcendent analytical element, item, right? And then the relationship of said items to the world, or what we call the real world, where the real world, right, is entropic, meaning that it's seemingly the natural ground is that this goes away. Now, the hope of transhumanism and of shifting the reality such that you would say that like the religious belief, like a religious belief as a projection into the future, such that we believe, or a lot of people believe, that somehow, like in a holodeck, they will just wake up out of their bodies. They will be given either a new body, or they'll exist in some sort of mental perpetuation, like a digitized version of themselves, something like that, and that they can call it a spirit or something like that. And so anyway, my notion was like trying to break down the idea of what it means for something to identify with, right, an identification with itself, right? So I identify the whole universe, the context, that which is not quite known but sensed, that I grant over an intelligence to, right? I'd say it's happening in my actual environment, right? So that's an extreme case of granting over something. So if we reel it back, we can say that almost any item that exists in the world is entropic, okay? But the course of what is considered logically the case and not the case, right? Whether or not someone is chasing down truth or chasing down knowledge is dependent on, first, seemingly a type of foundationalism, right? And then, so meaning that we require a subject and predicate in the sentence, and one of them is to stabilize the case, right? So, and that becomes a given, right? So the verb is the action about the noun, right? And so the noun is the stabilizing element generally, right? It's not necessarily the focal element, but it's the stabilizing element, and then the verb runs around it. Same thing, subject, predicate. We have this distinction. So anyway, if somebody, like, if I argue in favor of contradiction, right? Let's say, then I might argue that a bachelor is not necessarily an unmarried man. Okay, so first index for that is a category mistake or purposeful inclusion of a different category, such that there's a person named bachelor that is married, right? So we'd say, well, that's a name title error, but it doesn't mean it's outside of the realm of exceptions or inclusions into the rule of individuals that are bachelors that are married, right? Now, in another case, you would take a multivariant entropic, well, not an entropic. Being married is not necessarily, it's a categorization of relationships. And we also want to say that those relationships are negentropic, but they're ephemeral, right? So let's say there's an ephemeral event that supposedly changes the relational category of what we say is an unmarried person to a married person. Now, generally, we want to ground what a bachelor is and define it as an unmarried male, right? Or a maiden, right? A maiden is generally, if I have this correct, a maiden is an unmarried woman, right? So you have a bachelor and a maiden, and then they become husband and wife, and they cease to be bachelor and maiden. Now, give me some charity if I'm wrong with the maiden term, right? A bachelor is pretty solidified with that definition. Now, if you take a complex of variables and you speak, now keep in mind, I'm not drawing this out for you, so all of this is within my ephemeral and my phonemes, meaning the sounds, right? I'm not giving you a graphic relative to this. Of course, you could view a graphic if you would like. What I'm suggesting is this, though, right? Is that, let's say that you have a relationship between a man and a wife is a type of promise, right? And it could also be a type of communal ritual, and it could be a type of legal status statement in legal code, right? So you have the ritual, you have the promise, and you have, and even promise, you could use another term like a vowing towards, right? A vowing towards, a begging towards. Each party submits to a relationship aspect, which I'm calling a promise. You have the promise, you have the ritual, you have the law. Now, the ritual itself, we generally say a marriage is performed, right? And it's performed both in the eyes of God, meaning it could be done in secret vows, person to person. We could say that that's what a marriage is, right? But then that would become, you could say, oh, well, they're boyfriend, girlfriend. They didn't legally get married. They vowed to each other, but they're really just boyfriend, girlfriend living together, let's say, right? And so what we have here is we have boyfriend, girlfriend living together, but they vowed to each other. They say we're married before God, let's say. Okay, so you want to grant something over there. But now, did the ritual of the promise have any witnesses outside of the two making it, right? The reason we speak of marriage, that there is a marriage is done in triptychs. It's the two parties, at least two parties, right? Notwithstanding polyamory, but two parties and um, and the person doing the marrying, right? Beyond the two parties, you have the person doing the marrying, and then you have the witnesses. Now, witnesses are generally in Western convention based on two other individuals. Why two? So that the corroboration of the two witnesses being extant partes, meaning they're ex parte to the practice, right? They're not the ones being married. They're not the ones marrying. They're simply witnesses of this, so that two people can testify to this, right? So basically, what you could have is that you have now the people getting married, the priest or whoever's doing the bonding, the ceremony, and then the witnesses. And now the community could be a community of witnesses, like the family. It's those who are supporting the ritual of the marriage, right? And then you have the context of this community. This can be done in churches, which take on even some sort of substantiation within the relegation of the church, or they could just be like secular weddings performed outside of relationship, or that which is, hey, we're just about the legal code, we're just about these processes and so forth, right? So basically, then what could constitute as a not bachelor, right? Could be a couple things, right? Let's say that the man is being married, the bachelor is being married, and the priest says, "Do you take this woman to be your lawful wedded wife?" For example, in this type of ceremony. And let's say instead of saying yes, he belches. He's got something in his throat. He's coughing. And he makes a guttural sound, and then the priest declares them married. The maiden, the wife to be, comes and kisses him, and the whole crowd cheers. But in his mind, he did not say yes, right? He did not say yes, but the ritual, the community, everybody defines him now as married. Let's just say he kind of goes on his way, and not his way, but their way, with the presumption that fine, that constituted a vow, regardless of his actual intending that very sentiment, right? So that at that point, we would say, well, the guy is not a bachelor. He's both a bachelor and he's not a bachelor, right? Now, so let's say that's one variable. Let's say there's a variable of a promise, right? That a woman would never marry another, like a non-Jew. Like, she's Jewish. She's made a promise prior to their wedding that she would never marry a non-Jewish guy. She believes her husband's a Jew, Jewish, but he's not Jewish, right? But this information is presumed, but it's not the case, right? And so if you say one promise to marry him came after the fact of a prior promise, where the prior promise has greater emphasis, meaning it trumps the latter promise, such that any of her vows after the initial promise, the initial predicated promise, become not necessarily the case, not necessarily bonded to in her mind, right? Now that's a looser example, right? Because you could always say, I'm disjunct from my previous promises. Everything I'm doing now in the moment is the case, right? But then let's say your relationship with a bachelor or the marriage ceremony, you have all the people there, you have the witnesses, you have the priest. But let's say two things relative to the priest. Let's say the context is within a church, but the priest's relationship to the church is not solidified, meaning he's been, what do you call it, de-deaconized, or he's been disavowed, right, something of that effect. At that point, he's not a viable priest within the church. What do you call that? Excommunicated, right? So let's say the priest is, without his knowledge, excommunicated, and he's performing an act that is supposed to be relegated to the church, right? Or in another case, let's just say legally his license to marry is expired. It's become expired. Maybe it was over a weekend, right? Maybe he had certain business days, but now it's over a weekend, right? So it's expired, right? So he's performing a marriage. It's functionally legal, like the community calls it legal, right? But it's not legal, right? So when one appeals to the authority of the law, if one's going to define their marriage as such, then they would say, well, he's not a bachelor. I mean, we've gone through all this, but legally he's still not married. So legally he's still a bachelor, but we've moved this process, right? So let's say that we have these multivariant processes, relative or contingent, about what a marriage is defined as, right? Then we would run into some problems here, right? And so the reason I bring that up is because at this point, people can my phomeme, my words, my ephemeral words going on, only coded in this, right? If you were just sitting here telling this story, or if you never watch this video again, as if it's ephemeral, right? Fleeting and non-reoccurring one-time events, right? You could be left and bereft with the idea that what it is I'm stating, you in your mind can say, no, they're married, right? They just need to do this and that and appeal the case of him no longer being a bachelor, either to the law, to the church, or to the community, right? And you could say my use of the term not is not legitimate, right? So here's the quandary of nots. The not statement is what I think is has it's the idea of encoding between natural language, natural spoken language, and written language, and then supplementing the written language for code becomes emblematic of a bit of a problem, right? So here we go. I'll put okay. First line, you got not p. You can code it as not p with dashes, and then here's the problem with not p's. Right. The difference is that the not p. See, I'm trying to figure out which side that's going to show up on your end, right? The one with the double parentheticals, the not p, disjuncts how it is we refer to p, where the second one is simply a not p, right? And so with lingually, I can say not p, right? Hopefully, if I say not p with a certain accent, that means this one, right? Not p, but not p verbally might be interpreted this way. Now, the problem is that without a syntactic codec, the distinction between what is meant, what must be meant, and what is interpreted are not clear. They're never clear, right? It almost requires a reapproach in syntax. And that's the difference between the phoneme grapheme difference that Derrida is trying to denote, right? So anyway, so let's say we drop down from that, right? And we have not p, right? Just emphasis there, right? And then what are the conclusions of not p, right? So we go over here, not p, right? You're excluding the whole category, or you do the second one down, you go not p, emphasizing the p again, and then the bottom one kind of doing the same, not p, right? And so you can put the categories of not p in at least three possible subtexts, especially if it's just verbal, right? And so now if somebody's writing code, let's say programming code, the context for what is meant by P, depending on which language you're using, is defined, it's relegated to whatever the syntax is, meaning program is a syntax operation. It's not a FOME operation, even though a lot of programs record FOME, right? It's a syntactical operation, so it's necessarily encoded what it is you're stating. But the object being absented from a parenthetical becomes what is at issue, right? So okay, so then I go something like this. Now this is all the way, by the way, for my book. These are all stuff in the book that I'm creating. Just giving you guys a bit of a head up here, right? So one thing Derrida also said that I really liked was a thing is found, the totality of a thing is found outside of itself, right? So I'll hopefully be able to move this diatribe into discourse. Let's just give you guys a prelude here. Okay, so over here we have bachelor, right? And bachelor being this guy here, right? That's the bachelor. We get bachelor, and it's defined by its interior, right? We say something like that. And then over here, I might say, oh, that's not a bachelor, right? But why do I put the arrows in like that, right? Because I'm trying to say the outline of bachelor, the totality of bachelorism, if you will, is defined by the outside context, right? In the case I gave before, it was either the law structure, the priest's context, and the community. Now, supposing that the man did say the yes, that the priest is valid in the church and legally, and that there are witnesses and there is a ritual, and that it refines all of these things. Now, what could make him not a bachelor, not be a married man? Well, what if his name was not bachelor, right? Another category disjunct, right? Okay, anyway. So then we come down here, and so we have two cases of not bachelor, and the empty case, not a bachelor, removes the B, and not a bachelor, once again, from the outside, right? Arrows going out. Why is this important? This is important for trying to speak about, well, first of all, as a disjunct into political identities, like between the left and the right, let's say, right? Let's say you get women that are arguing, right, whether they're a feminist or not, right, or what their identity is, pronoun identities. I want to be identified as X, Y, and Z, right? I want you to follow my changing names, my ongoing sense. That would be like this, where the individual is defined by an ever-changing variable within itself, but they recognize there's an outbound community, and they want that outbound community to appreciate them as such, as inbound, right? I want the outbound to appreciate me as inbound, right? The problem with certain things would be optics, right? Now, if we reduce the category of like, I'm a furry, I'm a brown furry, I want to be identified as a furry, let's say, right? And let's say there's only all of a sudden that has a sense to it. It assumes a community, and it assumes another individual. But it doesn't just assume another individual, it assumes another individual within a community, right? So we're back to this. So it doesn't only just assume my statement, it assumes another statement, and then it assumes a community statement. In other words, if all of a sudden I was getting in a discussion with someone that said, I'm a brown furry feminist, and I said, I'm a bachelor, and it'd be great if you referred to me as that, right? But then let's say the rest of humanity and all recording devices and everything just went out of existence. A transcendental like an epiphenomenal transcendent idea of all of humanity dies. It's never recoverable. There's only two of us left. The whole definition and the whole context about identity falls into strictly the maintenance of the relationship between those two people, but it absences itself from all historic contexts and all communal contexts, right? So the reason I bring that up is because someone might say, I'm not a like when people say, I get into these arguments and people say, are you a theist or are you an atheist? I'll say, I'm not a theist. Or are you a Christian or not a Christian? I'm not a Christian. Okay. So when I index two different classes of racism, right? You have the historic racism, individual to individual, projecting the class group of somebody else, right? Like the idea of racism in a two-party universe, two people and that's it. There's no appeal, right? There's simply the immediate difference, right? But it's no longer a different class nor category, because class and category have fallen away, right? Or at least category has fallen away. And so this is the problematic aspects of certain things. So if I say there's two classes of racism now, where one is considered background, systemic, cultural, communal, and historic, right? Or that the culture of the past has systematized some sort of bias that's both rooted in the history of law structure and the history of claimed predominance, and that it's done so within a powerful country such as the US, right? So that would be indexing. I call it indexing number 2. Indexing number 1 is just an individual to individual, where there is a bias and a behavioral discrimination based on bias of that individual's assumed class of person being otherly or different than in the first case, right? So if there's these two classes of cases, I could say, I'm not a racist, someone saying that I'm a racist. And in another case, I could say to anybody accusing me of that, that you're also not a racist, right? Like if they're trying to pin down my racist view, just by being white, that would qualify me as racist in the second indexing, right? So I could approach it communally outside and say, oh, I have this privilege that is indicative of the system in which you've coded me in, the context coding, right? But now the problem with this kind of discussion, right, is that oftentimes what's going on is that like feminism or critical theory, these types of things, these aren't just spoken like these interviews you see, right? These interviews that you see, these are not just spoken recordings, like this recording is just spoken. I haven't added a syntax of what it is I'm saying, other than what I'm showing you, right? So you'll get these arguments, but a lot of times the argument would necessarily rely on a coded grapheme to know what it is you mean by this class of cases and my belonging to this class of cases, and then the presumption about my belonging to this class of cases in one indexing and then in another indexing, right? So instead of the problem being between foamine and graphemine and its relationship to the case, it's now between syntax, it's between category placement, meaning it's in lieu of syntax, you just have the lingual, the ephemeral lingual, and then you have all the presumptions that come along with that are syntax bound. They're syntax necessary. And minus that syntax, you'll always have this perceived disjunct, a possible disjunct that can occur, right? So why do I bring all that up? I'm not certain. Other than to say like, oh, I'm not a feminist. I grew up in a left-leaning libertarian, old libertarian classification household, mother feminist, kind of going through the system, right? I'm not feminist, but I'm not a feminist. But I'm neither not a feminist nor am I a feminist, right? Meaning at some point I can disjunct myself depending on whatever the category is, such as the idea, oh, well, there can be no males that are feminine or feminists. No, there can be. No, what does it mean, right? And so then the problem comes down to what's called the justification, right? We're seeking a truth, we're seeking knowledge of the truth, and that this knowledge requires a justification. So what do we say about this justification? This justification is relative to the syntax relationship to the world, right? So when, but I already made a recording of that. But anyway, so the problem is that syntax relationship or projection relative to the world is not necessarily, like in some cases you can consider it justified, but that justification also has to be agreed upon, right, as justification, because the syntax and or the words, whether they're grapheme or phoneme, they're justified against some X principle in the world or against some other item of discourse. Now, if they're based on some item of discourse and you're arguing about what defines a triangle, you could say that it's a priori, we're talking about the analytic. If you're talking about a posteriori, then you're talking about experience. And if you're talking about experience, then you're not just talking about experience in the mind, you're talking about one's experience in the world. The world then necessarily would fall within some entropic position, such as it's easy to refer to Lincoln, but there is no Lincoln to refer to. So we have supplements of Lincoln to refer to Lincoln, but Lincoln being a property of the entropic world, that the justification of the term Lincoln, referring to the 16th president of the United States, has fallen into a separate category than speaking about my canvas is on the wall, right? The canvas is on the wall, right? Now I can say that, right? But now there's a problem, because if I say, oh, my dog is on the mat, right? And there's no reference. You guys can't see my dog on the mat. As a matter of fact, I don't have a dog. And I have a mat, but I don't have a dog. But if I say the dog is on the mat, prepositionally, that's assumed to be, one on top of the other. But if I say the canvas is on the wall, the preposition isn't this way to this, it's now this way to this, yet we're still using the preposition on, right? You might say, oh, I should have used the word upon, right? So this just becomes all problematic, right? And so then you get something like, the dog upon the mat that I'm referring to is a mat that is like the Aladdin's rug, right? So if I say, meaning if we're questing for truth and we're questing for relational truth, then the relationship of speaking about the dog upon the mat versus the canvas upon the wall, let's just clarify and solidify. We're talking about a dog upon a mat or a dog on a mat, right? But then the context, once again, the outbound, the inbound exterior versus the outbound, right? So the context shifts, the arrows shift, right? So once again, the totality of a thing is found outside of the thing. That phrase is referring to this, where B is the case and the totality of that case is found outside of that case. It's not an identification stemming from the identity inward, right? And so and once again, it's a parenthetical problem. It's a mapping problem. And then it's a conceptual problem. And that's why I'm even trying to write the book, is to form fit a dissonance, kind of like you could say President Trump is putting dissonance into the world of politics. Yeah, he certainly is, and he's upsetting some of the political sediment by challenging, by roughing it up, by being a sea turtle on the floor that's pushing up sand or some other entity, right? He's pulling up the sediment. Anyway, but this is the point, right? Is that the problems with philosophy and identity and even stability and sanity are related down to how, like people's sanity and their foundations are based on a not questioning and not fettering out differences within their universe. At some point, we want a ground, right? Now, even Wittgenstein said, what thou you cannot speak of, you must pass over in silence, or what you cannot speak of with clarity, you must pass over in silence, right? It's not that you can't speak on it, it's that he doesn't want you to speak anymore, right? Meaning he doesn't want you to try to make a sense out of bits of irrationality, right? It's not uniform, and yet you can pick apart someone's history, and if someone identifies with their ancestry and their history, that's one thing, right? And so there's this idea of what is happening philosophically, what is happening politically, right? But what is happening philosophically, right, is that now, and the why post, this whole trying first to make Marx connotatively negative, right? And then to associate postmodernism, which is considered difficult reading, to this postmodernism. So it entails this negative connotation with it. And then you scapegoat the postmodernist. But the postmodernist is already present. Even the people that are critiquing it often use this disjunct between that which is recorded verbally and that which is syntactic, right? And then they oscillate between the two, and the sophomoric, non-sophisticated mind, right, has problems when they run into this, right? And then that's where the heat of argumentation and everything comes in. So philosophically, though, there is a grounding in the Western philosophical canon called knowledge is justified true belief. Now, if you go a video prior to this one, you'll be able to listen to an audio recording where I'm in an argument concerning that, and I'm using that argument and in practice to figure out how it is to state all these things in my book. And that even the book is not, it can be a book that's printed, but it might also have hyperlinks for a PDF. And there's a huge difference, right? If I hyperlink it out, which I'm trying in a way to not do, right? But if I do it, it allows entanglement, right? And so a book is defined generally from cover to cover. Then you can have series of books, like episodes. And then I don't know. I don't even know why I'm talking about that right now, other than to say that individual identity then can be reframed in terms of their emotive, their migratable ability, a motive ability, one's relationship to their environment, and then one's relationship to aesthetic in their environment, and then one's relationship to their activity in their community and their relationship to their aesthetic in their environment. And these guys, all sorts of dilemmas. So that was 45 minutes. Okay, well, what kind of mind melt was that? I didn't get any painting done. And this thing's belabored. What to say on it? Okay, so regular DOS Pook channel. Look, if I'm here to destroy stuff and stay with the theme of DOS Pook, which, quite frankly, I want to get through this bottlenecked hump of dissonance. In one way, I feel like, okay, I have to complete this book, even though I feel as if my art's projection relies on disparate components, right? Even a lot of my artwork has these disparate components that are relative to some particular type of center, and that they need to be offset. And so that's just to give you guys one micro frame, as boring as it is. Sorry, I'm boring you. I didn't mean to bore you, but I'm boring you, right? And not that I even expect you guys to agree with or pretend to agree with, because once again, you can resolve all of this by just taking what it is I'm saying and syntactically encoding it, and then demanding that there is a history of the encoding, and that I must accept that history of encoding. Right, so you'll get a video with Ben Shapiro arguing with a gender, someone that's fluid gender, meaning that their identity, their internal identity, is spoke of as being fluid and dynamic and migratable, which I think is fine. But then you get the context of that, the outer definition pointing back at the inner definition, and then Ben Shapiro shifts the argument to how old are you? Right, now, this could have been answered in various ways, but the traditional ground of when someone asks you how old they are, generally you presume they're speaking of years. You have the Gregorian years and non-Gregorian years. You have a whole history of what a year is that could be pulled apart, right? It could have been answered in months or weeks or days. It could have been answered in segments of decades, however they wanted to divide it up. But the person says, oh, I'm 20 something. I'm 20. And then Ben Shapiro says, well, why aren't you 60? Right? Why don't you identify as if you're 60? And then that was somehow this stumping block, right? And it doesn't mean that, like, if she said, I'm 20 years old, that would cement her in the tradition that we already generally accept and agree upon as years. The idea of always finding the disjunct or pulling up sediment of ground, of foundation, is to say, oh, underneath the canvas is a wall, and underneath the wall are beams, and behind those beams are this and the same thing with the ground. Underneath my feet is tile, and underneath the tile is wood, and underneath the wood is lattice, and underneath that is another apartment, right, and so forth. So the idea of it's not just turtles all the way down, it's differing turtles all the way down, right? It's different shells of turtles all the way down. And so then that falls us into the idea of truth as a type of infinite regress, because one can indefinitely find difference, right? And so truth is then based on a type of agreement, that if we're to speak at all, we must necessarily predicate that agreement upon something. So that being said, move back into the aesthetic field, right? What can be described within the aesthetic field? And my first thing to describe is how this coffee is going to go into my belly. My belly. Warm, juicy coffee. It's the aesthetic of my bodily emotions as I perceive them internally, phenomenologically, and whatnot. Right. So okay, boy, I'm really I've been fighting about this particular corner and this corner's relationship to the whole painting. So we got to get some tape. So at least we got through 46. But finally, boy, someone out of the 3 people that watched, I got 1 thumbs up. That's a plus. Appreciate all the thumbs up I can get. Be sure to like and subscribe and share and repeat and watch again and again and again and again. I'm the only thing that you'll ever see again in your entire life, your entire universe. Because me. Yeah. Me in the temple of me, talking about me and my Scooby snacks. But okay, so somebody, like someone posted an Einstein quote. Shit, man. If my roommate came home early and he's been sleeping and being loud, but I don't think he gets home for another bit. So someone else, someone posted some Einstein quote that basically was talking about how to visually conceive ideas, right? That the secret to solving things is a type of spatial conceptualization, right? And that's why furthering my drawings on this topic is, it's a whole notebook of trying to run different orthogonals now, right? And this gets back to just this long project where I take a P and then I make a not P and I parenthetically regroup them and then relate them, abut them against each other as if one could, as if to say, all not P's are lesser than P's, or all not P's are equal in voluminous units as all P's, right? And then take the 2, right? And then put the 2 side by side like in a regular thing, P and not P, and then to imbricate them, layer them, right? And then to show whatever this running line is between the 2, right? And this part gets a little more confusing. I was even using this. Okay, so then you rotate the orthography, right, back to the side position, right? And then you're running anliatheism and dileatheism, right? And namely, you say this is neither the case. It is neither P nor not P, right? And that allows what's called a glute or a gap. And then you maintain the contradictory space up here, right? And that's the gap. But what do you say about that maintenance of contradictory space? You're saying that it's true, right? So that would be if you were running a line through the P and not P. But then what do you do when the actual P and not P are not imbricated, right? But they are considered the same space, right? So we'd say bachelor and not bachelor, right? And so let's say that for all areas here, instead of saying bachelor and not bachelor, I would say the totality of this item is found outside of itself, and the totality of this item is found within itself or from itself, right? So the idea of an internal identity as opposed to a communal identity, right? At that stage, though, okay, then that goes back here, right? And so here's the flip, right? Is then we run actually perpendicular negatives or identities, right? Or identities and non-identities. We run them through one another, right? And so then this becomes an extrusion of a subset with the what I'll call our like gap holes, like there's something called a Dendale ball, right? Which is a plane moving up through a parabola. So parabola, like an hourglass, right? It's moving a ball up, a plane that pushes a sphere up, where the sphere gets smaller and smaller through an hourglass, right? And so I'm trying to find out what the gap is, meaning what the bottleneck is of this Dendale ball, which I didn't draw here, right? But I've been working on that for a while, right? And then to back step and reappropriate these different forms of negation, either outbound identities relative to inbound identities, and then disjuncting the two, or otherwise. And then I might as well just give you guys some notes, because this will function as my own notes. Right. Okay. So then here we have this problem, right? Which is here's a shadow, right? That's, let's say, attributed to what you don't know. You don't know if the shadow is attributed to this person in this hall or this person in this hall, right? Let's say that the light source is unknown. You're not able to define, or the way the highlights are allows an attribution to this person wrongly, right? And not to this person, which you'd say is rightly to be attributed. So in lieu of knowing certain things, then you get falsification, right? And so once again, my whole endeavor here is not to remove the current module of logic. Like in propositional logic, you say X, and if you say not X, right, that's one thing. But if you say not X, then that points back to X, right? Which is what I'm getting at here, right? Like I'm not removing that index, right? I'm saying, okay, let's overly index this, because it's needed, because as language, as a code, is apparently attributable, or we need to attribute its aspects to the world. We need to pull it from its analytic positions, right? Pull it from these held models or modules, and reassert other indexings, right? That's what the whole point of all this is, right? So here we go now as far as stellation, extruding and stellation, they're two very important topics. It's the way that you can make an hourglass out of a pyramid, right? So I kind of do that. If you take a pyramid, just not a triangle, but two lines that intersect, they're a tangent point, and then you stellate them through, right? So you could say this now becomes like an hourglass, right? And then you can do an anti-stellation, or a perpendicular stellation, such that a diamond, or you slice a diamond in half, or a square in half, and you get triangles, that a square is triangle made of triangles, right? You could argue something like that, two right triangles. And so the idea then becomes, what can geometrically and analytically be spoken of that we can represent in mathematical graphs, right? And then what can we then do as far as an adjustment, coffee, thank you, between, right? So then what can we do when we're talking about the idea of seeing something in one's experience that informs one's analytic perception? And by that, and that's why I have that graph there, right? These are representing mountains. Okay, here's a mountain, and the mountain roughly looks like a triangle. So I can just point to the mountain as an example of what a triangle is, right? But let's say we're driving by, so that particular mountain becomes ephemeral once again. So the relationship between the ephemeral and the concrete, the holding on to dear life, everyone's soul so badly wanting to place these artifacts as if the artifacts will carry over into an afterlife, so to speak, right? And we have that drive because we don't want to believe that oh, there's a God and all this other, you could be a theist or an atheist living from your birth till your death, and there may be no extension of your being beyond this artifact, right? There may be, I even say, oh, I've seen these entities that are supernatural, but that doesn't mean that I have something like them. It doesn't deny it, meaning I can have that emotive idea, but I have no justification for believing that other than an intuitive feeling, right? But so let's say that now I wanted to take something from the ground, like a mountain, right? And I wanted to stellate. First, I wanted to analyze, make an analogy to something that is like a platonic form, like a triangle, right? Then let's say I want to stellate that triangle, but I want to somehow maintain the fact that what it is I'm seeing is a mountain, as if the mountain being, let's say, of the earth, right? It's dirt, and yet it here mirrors something analytical. And then let's say that which is stellated analytical implies an opposite, right? Such then now if I reapproach what is mountainous and I say that is what's secular, right? And then I stellate off of the mountain as an analytic layover, right? That at that point, that points to this opposite domain, which I would say is beyond metaphysical naturalism, beyond that which is secular, beyond that which is this ground, right? Which is kind of the idea of the notion of other dimensionality or other spirits, and then you'll get mathematics that justify this, multiple dimensions. I'll say I believe in that, not just as a proposition, but as a mental stellated activity that's not dissimilar to all of what this video is prescribing, right? And then once again, I'm going over P and not P and re-embedding that. All right, but back to painting here for a sec. Oh yeah. This is where I'm talking about the exclusive rings and then how to intersect. What does it mean to have a P and a not P intersect at a perpendicular as opposed to on the propositional single-linedness, right? That's important. But what? Oh, yeah. Like, and I here I'm using an example of a relational P justification to the world, such that we're referring to a dog, right? But upon closer analysis of a dog, let's say we find that its fur, it doesn't run in the direction of head to rump; it runs from the direction of rump to head, right? You get some of those dogs that have fur that runs around the head where it poofs up, right? That kind of are like a different species. But now let's say you found a dog, or that you found that the ears or ear holes of the dog were on the rump, right? So that the rest of the dog appears to be a dog, but there's obviously some sort of anomaly with the dog, right? Such that we want to call it a dog for all classes of cases, or for almost all classes of cases. The average person is going to agree that it's a dog, but it's obviously not a dog, right? It's like finding people, albino Negroes, right? Albino, I mean, it's a contradiction in terms to say black Negro or black albinos, but where everything about their general appearance concludes that they facilitate this sort of traditional classification, and yet their phenotype obviously does not reflect that, right? And so we want to reclass them, but the idea of this, it comes down to a Gettier case, right? Which I also was bringing up, the idea of the Gettier case in contra to justified true belief, in terms of the Western formal analytic situation, because I believe the Gettier case is important as a disjunct. They're trying to harmonize it. Here, I'm just arguing about what I said earlier about how to volumize, make a voluminous a Venn diagram of identity. Where am I at? An hour and 4. And then here, I'm trying to talk about the inclusion, not just an imbricated relationship of an item and its negation, but a partial, and this is where I was talking about that stellated extruding, right? So I almost feel bad because I wasn't going to make a video like this until I had published the book, right? But I guess this is a good way, and why not? You know, I still think I'm onto this before, with everything I need to state on it, and I'm so close to the end. And I even argued with myself, God, am I going to work on this damn painting today, or am I going to work on my damn book today? Because one way or the other, something feels crazy, damn crazy weird. But anyway, so imbricated, partially imbricated, or partially mixed, partially imbricated, and full embedded contradictory state there. Okay, but I'm missing one thing that I was trying to do with the stellation, right? Is that after one item stellates from another item, then we're able to transpose the stellated place, like disjunct it and then drop it into itself as another form of contrast, like a palimpsest. You know, you have a writing, you write it on paper, then you erase it, but there's this remnant mark, and that's called a palimpsest, right? When you get these layers of transparent plastics. Oh, okay, so here's what it is, right? So even you get the mountain, analytic mountain or real pyramid with a paraframe upon it, right? Here's one that's a step pyramid, and then you could say, oh, this is like an Egyptian pyramid, right, before they laid the limestone on it. And then here's after a presumption of what the pyramid is with the limestone on it, right? But then here's the analytic form of a part triangle, and then you stellate the triangle, and then this would, I could move this into a Dendel ball or hyperbola of the hourglass. But this is what I meant by then we disjunct the two. Once the stellation implies like a mirroring, right? And then you pull the two down into one another, right? You do this mentally. All of this, like seagulls, sigil, sigil, in witchcraft, different symbols that are said to have some sort of relationship to interdimensional intelligences or entities, such as the invocation of magic sets, are based often on these sigil processes, right? And so I was even going to mention that the idea of the parenthetical, right? The parenthetical boundedness, right? A parenthetical bound is concave, right? So it oftentimes doesn't make any sense whatsoever to draw or define, let's say, oh, I really want to speak of P, right? But I'm going to use two convex shapes around that. That's entirely applicable, though, to what I was suggesting here, is that the totality of the thing is found outside of the thing with the attention back to itself, right? Such that we might want to say, oh, x minus 1 here is excluded from some sort of other operation that, it's like I want to utilize formalization of set categories without making it a mathematical function. So there's a disjunct between logical function, set theory in logic, and then the idea of propositional logics, which is the analysis of the propositions, different than the functions in calculus, right? Such that Frege, makes distinct that he needs to define the predicate function prior to having the function's process. So you do f of x, where x is stabilized then, right? And it's meant to be an associative relationship. That's why arrows, the idea of arrows relationship, where's attention being drawn to a thing? Because I could have easily done the bachelor thing and said not, right? I could have first done the first not this way as arrows outbound. That would be not B. And then the not B, the second B would be all of the internal arrows, right? Exploring it that way. So anyway, but okay, now I don't, like I can and probably should try to notate or do an illustration like that. The reason it's not what I was trying to get at with the convex versus concave parentheticals, right, is that we could just draw these straight lines, right, such that what's considered internal of focus and external is not emphasized. But once again, everything, including the syntax of all code, is relative to these symbolic what we're supplementing our natural language and utterances with a syntax, and then how we supplement that syntax with code in order to bond, symbol. Syntax as symbol, and then syntax as, like, we have syntax that is symbolic, it's like a parentheses, and then like it's a diacritical marking, right? And yet but the letters that we're using are still generally relative to the elements in an alphabet. But now I'm just babbling beyond where I wanted to babble with that. What I'm going to do up here, though, is paint in just something really basic here, because why? Because the goal here is to reflect back to humanity is that my alarm? Is to reflect back to humanity some sort of like intelligence from another dimensional star system, right? Such that you guys can graphically enter into the virtual reality realm when it becomes more accessible, such that we have supplemental graphics. Oh, here's my roommate. Such as we have supplemental graphics. And those supplemental graphics, voluminous, agreed upon graphics that represent philosophical propositional spaces, then we can accord a philosophy and we can come to a modular agreement. It'll be truth based on module, right? When that's the second thing, basis for modular truth, right? Introduction of dissonance in the modern contemporary philosophy, as well as the basics for modular truth. And go from there. I'm gonna turn this off. My alarm's going. Howdy. So, just rambling, babbling, and painting. For me to fall asleep at like 8:30 at night and wake up at 4 in the morning. I'm like trying to get to your schedule.
Oh, snap. You're not far off. You're not far off.
Well,
They come with health warnings. Same, I was sitting there right after I got to work last night. My daughter texted me to let me know that it starts snowing there. So it's snow now, man.
Yeah, it's snow outside. Cool. Very good. So are you passing out soon? Are you going to be up, or I don't want to be loud out here rambling.
Go ahead and ramble, man. I'm probably going to go to bed pretty soon, but I'm going to take cold medicine, so it'll probably knock me out.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'll just try to keep it kind of low down. Semi-quiet side. Okay, so, see, even that, it's going to be a little different there. But gotta be sub pockets. I got this thing on record. This is a FYI.
Thank you.
And so this is trying to. That other night when I had that lady over that unspeakable. I should mention it as that, but since I'm recording, I thought, man, making a lot of ruckus for like 2 hours.
Oh, snap.
And I thought that's going to be pissing you off a little bit. I thought, because then I was like, man, maybe we're being quiet. But I sure felt obscure. That whole night was just like.
Was I here?
Wonky. I think you were. I think you were in the back.
I don't think I heard anything.
See, that's what I'm liking, is to know that that I'm not like all of my crazy bullshit isn't seeping in. You know, I mean, but Coleman, or he's mega sensitive on the ears. He hears everything.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, but
Yeah, I don't remember ever really hearing anything, man. That's why I said, was I here? Because I don't remember. I didn't even know you had a lady stay over, man. One night I didn't know because I think I heard you talking at one point, but not while I was in my room. I think it's when I was coming out to smoke or something.
oh,
like that.
well, that might have been the other. Yeah, huh? Not there. Yeah, huh? Interesting. Okay, well, right on. Peace, peace, cops are about.
Yeah, don't avoid bringing people by me because I'm back there in the back most of the time. Really, and when you're in your room, I can hardly hear anything.
It's not me bringing them over. It's me. I just don't want to be too loud to, you know.
And if it does, I'll let you know, man. Like that one time.
Yeah.
Because that was loud, man. I heard that. So, man, how's she doing? Are you guys like
Not in contact or?
Nah, she's just quiet. She's not. I don't know. A lot of people have fallen off the airwaves, actually.
Gotcha.
But
and it's
she's.
holiday time, man. So that happens.
And it's been, if I buy her vehicle from her, then she'll respond. But if I'm not, then she's just like can't chat it up.
Wow.
It's fine.
Sorry. Sorry.
You might hear me crying loudly for the next month over that.
So, Mike, can you hold that crying down, man? Because
I know. You're kind of loud. Stick a sock.
that's terrible, man. All right, have a good one.
Okay. Okay. So, see what I did there? Should have done that even by hand. That wasn't even quality. But, so this idea, I'm purposely trying to paint kind of this, like, okay, so here's a rectangle, and I'm trying to wall it off as kind of like a parenthetical domain, right? Here's a domain, and then here is a foreign element coming into the domain. So it's introducing not a semi-permeable, like you got that which is discrete, and that's which is diffuse. And you got the parenthetical limit, which is apparently symbolically their function is discrete, right? And then you'll have this problem with the, just this is now for me the idea, right, of you talk about an other dimensional, like, okay, so there's radio waves in this air, and those radio waves contain information. And even if I can't see the information, it doesn't mean that the information's there. And so symbolically, that might be, you might say, okay, we have, what do you say? You got the empty set, and then you just have that which is empty, and you can compare that to, an empty set, right? So you embed the signification of that which is empty within that which is empty, right? And then that becomes a disjunct through set theories also. But anyway, and so what I'm doing with this piece, like this is supposed to be a metaphor of the dimension of the painting with this inclusive drop in, right? Because that's supposed to be this angelic element, like coming right through the piece. And so it's meta upon itself. And then how to track through that. I didn't know, because I was getting upset at what I wasn't doing to this piece. And I wanted it to remain in the type of ambience, but then something critical about, I used to have these discussions with a friend of mine, because he'd say, man, your paintings are all foreground and no background. And then I'd look at his stuff, and it was this like dizzying flood of like background data, right? And so I'm all foreground and no background. He's all background and no foreground, right? And so it's trying to well place compositionally enough elements to offset the foreground, and yet to, I don't know. I mean, this is the beauty of the mind of any piece of artwork. And generally, I like the idea of non-combinatorial or non, I appreciate. I appreciate people that get together and produce things, as in movies or group projects. And yet, artistically, for painting, collaborations, I don't mind seeing them. I do think there's interest in noting or denoting styles that are they're connecting within a painting. But if I can find something that appears to have been collaborated, maybe that's kind of my thing or my shtick, right? Like, give an end presentation that looks like it was collaborated on, because there seems to be a slight multiplication of styles, distinct styles. Right? Seems to be something. Anyway, so I didn't quite know where I was going to go with the painting just yet today. And then it was really good. Last night, I got this guy I haven't talked to since like fucking 2005, just out of the blue calling me, and then leaving some like he just seemed like he was maybe half drunk, kicking it in his house somewhere like Pensacola, Florida is where I think he lives. And it would have been good to talk to the guy. Just I wasn't. I don't know. I didn't have my hair done up. In other words, I wasn't ready to talk to the guy, but I tried. I was just slightly, thinking I was catching him, and I missed him, and so I just let it sit, and then woke up a few hours later and typed, "What's up?" response. But he's a fellow artist that taught me a lot in terms of abstracts, and heavily influential on my life. There's so many people. More time is more people, more things influence, everyone's being. They maturate, and then a lot of people will condense. They'll move away from what they learned, and they'll I don't know, reroute themselves back in and something that's more historic to their childhood being. And then other people, they maintain kind of a general openness. And I don't know, people are really interesting as far as how they play into one another, and then where people are left out. Like I have this friend, and she's she's Vietnamese, and her kids are half black and half Vietnamese, and she's taken on kind of this. She's outrightly stated in 2018, "I am a social justice warrior, and I fight for these things." She also teaches school up in the Northwest, up in Oregon, and so forth, and that's kind of where that whole evergreen thing went, where there's like a pocket of this weird residual hippie white racism people up there, and there's this influx of the contrary, right? And then so I've had some semi ambiguous, semi contentious interactions with her on social media that, and I don't mean to contend, but I mean, I guess, to challenge, or at least to be allowed to express myself in certain cases. And yet, it's that whole exclusionary process. Index 2, the white people need to pull back, index 2 of racism, so to speak. And then, so that's been interesting and somewhat difficult to engage in, because I grant sympathies to human perspective, right? Regardless, but I won't empathize with certain things, but I will sympathize with most everything. But I also have an emotional limit and a visceral limit. Like, I don't want to empathize with someone that cleans up like dead human carcasses, or is involved in anything like pedophilia or a murderous event, even war. Like, I can read about war, but I really don't want to get in the mind. Like, I don't want to spend my time in the mind of someone that is pathologically at war. Same thing with people with depressions and anxieties, meaning I'm better inculcating or empathizing with that based on slight histories of that. But otherwise, I want to exhume, like, allow it to settle in, allow it to bury itself as this idea, but then exhume it and extract it, and only remember, if you will, the symbol of the empty set of it, right? Don't grab, or maybe a remembrance of the symbol of an empty set, right? Something that's layers of segmented separation, right? And that's where, when people pocket themselves into their families and their groups and their units, and then they confound their ground, and they insist upon what is the case, or they're ignorant to there being any difference. They solidify that, or they reground themselves in their historic conditionings and beliefs. Then it's difficult, because this friend that I'm telling you about, like, she's got, I don't think she's forgetting how we're put together. It's just that, her life has moved on, and she's got to take on a different role, I suppose, politically, that entices, like, she's a woman, but all of her offspring are men, and both the men are composed of what you would say, on the systemic level, the intersect between both being black, or both being of two non-white in the U.S. categories, but and they're not tall. I mean, that might be another thing, right? They're short. The guy that she had offspring with, both black but very, very short. She's very, very short. I don't know. So maybe there's two intersects of negativity or something, and yet she's the woman. And so, and there's always that idea, like saying, oh, well, the left will eat itself, right? Because it can't possibly maneuver through the minutia of intersecting complexities, right? And even if it does, and it lays out, kind of like I'm laying out this philosophical description of what I think is happening at a philosophical core, and trying to re-relate it to political attribution and political description for a sense of clarity, a new, greater, complex sense of clarity. Because I attempt to schema it that way doesn't mean anyone else is required to agree with my schemas. Anyway, remember to like and subscribe. And anyway, thanks for listening to my internal state. I wish it was happier. I wish it was like even me, you, Mike, looking back on this, whenever you do, if you do, like you had just recently gone through a huge bout of symbolic depressions in terms of your aesthetic, and how it is you're spending your time and what it is you're doing with your time. And Mike, you're caught also within being suppressed transportationally because you don't have a license any longer. And now you're also in the winter, so things are colder. You got your pains. You're having a hard time using public transportation because you cannot walk what is traditionally considered short distances by able-bodied people without experiencing either greater degrees of pain or potentially further physiological damage. You're going to see a surgeon in a couple of days as a consultation, to having the tendons under your toes cut so that your gait takes on a closer proximity to a natural stride. And so this, your health, you're not able to get to the gym, you're exercising less, you're eating more, you're putting on more weight, you're more lethargic, you have an art show in roughly 20 days, which you want to embody. The name is Mind Melt, right? But it should have been Mind Meld, right? Two totally different ideas. To mind melt somebody is different than just mind meld. This is supposed to actually be a mind melding process. Anyway, I better cut this off. It's an hour and a half. What am I doing? What am I thinking, right? Anyway, so to follow up with that, though, Mike, is that you, meaning me, your attitude has risen. You're not in that same dark place. You were concerned about moving back into a positive place such that you would continue to execute negative aesthetics, what I consider like emotionally negative aesthetics. That became like almost a spiritual issue, right? And then a damned if I do, but I wouldn't know what else to do otherwise, sort of watch me pocket myself in these positions of my own future soul relative to the outcome of my life, or the next stage or segment of my life, right? So there's degrees of me kicking the can down the road or kicking the dead horse in what it is I'm doing. And then there's that notion that somehow even these long diatribed videos and expositions about myself relative to how it is I'm conceiving the universe, even though I try to categorize those and limit them to this Das Pook channel. Sometimes there's other categories. There's even been other channels that I've involved in. I don't know. I'm not actually certain what to say other than I'm ready for a major shooting myself out of the whale's spout hole. kind of, utilizing, even writing this book on embedded contradiction is a type of furthering my soul, if you will, or my legacy, and hence my soul, if you will, into this deconstructive sense. The reason I'm trying to make voluminous these things and reconstruct them is because I wanted kind of definitions of truth to re-land as modules, right? Because I really do believe in the future there's going to be a philosophical disjunct right out of the Western canon, and it'll be required. There's only so many ties that we can use to the rational historic field before there's kind of this, I don't know, like a bloating of the bladder of the Western world that blows out of itself, right? And then there'll be that archetype of solidifying, a restructuring. It will be a crumbling and a restructuring. But whatever the next restructuring will be, will involve, hopefully, the maintenance of the internet in a way is to maintain a pocketed future secret history or pocketed non-secret history that allows all of the benefits of all of the things that our civilization has created to create a further, if you will, like a Dr. Seuss land rubbery world that is still, it's maintained in some sort of plastic way, and not to say a relative way, but I don't know, greater systems as far as the formality of system, but greater mutability and greater emotional ability, and then greater empathy. And I think all of this needs to scale, and should hopefully scale into advancing our species and advancing us as individuals behaving amongst one another, such that we can bond with that which I believe is alien, where we can bring ourselves to what is a higher spiritual frequency, and whatever that frequency is let's say less volatile, or has a different frequency of volatility within it, kind of like raising the water table of a pond as opposed to raising the ocean with all of its thrashings about, right? That the higher dimensions would be less volatile. But perhaps I'm wrong, and the inverse of that is that as we increase into the future and we bond with what other people are doing and saying, and that becomes a part of us and inculcates through us and throughout us, that there's more upheaval, more dramas, that limits of drama are both appreciated in their static form and overemphasized in their dramatic form. And that being said, we call that being over and out. Did I mention the thumbs up button? Anyway, pleasure doing another one of these. Right.